My own son forged my name. Margaret Rhodes stared across the courtroom, watching Dylan, her only child, pretend to cry as the charges were read. He hadn't just stolen her house. He'd stolen her voice, her rights, her name. And now, cuffed and cornered, he was still trying to play the victim. I gave you life, she said quietly. You tried to sign it away. The gavel dropped, and so did every mask he ever wore. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun cut across the kitchen linoleum in pale gold stripes, pooling beneath Margaret's bare feet as she reached for the fridge door. The creamer sat on the top shelf, her favorite hazelnut kind, the one Dylan always teased her for calling a treat. She rose on her toes just slightly, a nudge more. The carton shifted forward, her balance slipped, and then the world tilted. Her foot slid on the edge of a dropped ice cube. The creamer hit the floor with a plastic thud. Her body followed, not all at once, but in cruel stutters, hip, shoulder, temple. A bright jolt of pain tore up her right side as her head cracked the lower cabinet. She didn't scream. She couldn't. For a moment, the kitchen was filled with nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the ragged throb in her skull. Then, black. When she came to, the air smelled of antiseptic and metal. The buzz of overhead fluorescent lights vibrated behind her eyes like a hornet. A curtain rustled nearby, and she tried to speak, but could only manage a rasp. A voice, her son's, cut through the static. I'm telling you, she needs to be placed somewhere, a facility, full-time. She's not safe alone. Dylan. His voice wasn't panicked. It wasn't even worried. It was low, clipped, like he was discussing an overdue bill, not his mother's fractured hip. Sir? A nurse said gently. Her scan was clear. With rehab, she'll recover fine at home. There's no reason. Dylan cut her off. You're not listening. I run a company. I can't take this on right now. I don't have the bandwidth. Margaret blinked slowly, her vision a smear of blue scrubs and 2 white walls. She tried to turn her head, but it throbbed in protest. Her hand twitched toward the bed rail. She's had mental lapses, Dylan added. Confusion. She forgot my birthday last month. She's been slipping. No, she hadn't. She'd mailed him a gift. A leather-bound notebook with his initials embossed. She'd even texted to make sure he got it. He never replied. The nurse hesitated. There's no dementia flag on her file, Mr. Rhodes. You're not family, he said. I am, and I'm telling you she needs more than rehab. Margaret's chest tightened, not from injury, but from something colder, older. A creeping chill that climbed her spine. He was planning something. She knew that voice. Smooth, professional, deliberately logical. It was the same tone he used to fire longtime employees under the guise of restructuring. A hand touched her arm lightly. A nurse, younger, kind eyes. Mrs. Rhodes, can you hear me? She nodded. Barely. We'll need to run another set of scans, the nurse whispered. But you're okay. You're lucky. No bleed, just a nasty bruise and a fractured hip. A few weeks of physical therapy and you'll be back on your feet. Don't tell her that. Dylan snapped from behind the curtain. She'll think she can go home alone. The nurse stiffened. She can go home, with help. Silence. Margaret turned her head just enough to catch the edge of her son's shadow outside the curtain. Cold, still. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't shaken. He was planning. She closed her eyes. Beneath the pain, beneath the nausea, a voice from deep inside her stirred awake. One she hadn't heard in years, not since Henry died, not since Dylan started treating her like background noise in his world of pitch decks and VC calls. The voice said, "Watch him. This isn't about safety." And just before the morphine lull carried her under again, she clutched the nurse's sleeve. "Don't let him take my phone." Then, darkness. And a whisper from the hallway as Dylan took a call. "Yeah, she's in. No way she's coming back out." Margaret came to slowly, as if resurfacing from deep water. The ceiling was different, yellow-tinted, with a cracked ventilation grate directly overhead. The room smelled faintly of bleach, overripe bananas, and something metallic beneath it all. She tried to sit up. Pain pulsed from her hip like an alarm. She clenched her teeth and gripped the bed rail. Vinyl sheets, no personal blankets, no framed photo of Henry, no familiar hum of her kitchen fridge, not a hospital. This was somewhere else. "Good morning," came a voice from the foot of the bed. Dylan. He looked freshly showered. Crisp navy polo, white sneakers. Too calm. "Where am I?" she asked, throat dry. "A transitional care center," he said smoothly. "It's a rehab facility, Mom. Best reviewed in the county. They specialize in post-op recovery for folks your age." She stared at him. "You didn't tell me." "You were still sedated," he said, shrugging. "The doctors said you'd need long-term care. Insurance approved it, so I signed the forms. It's best for everyone." Everyone. Margaret's chest tightened. "I didn't consent to this," she said. "You don't need to stress," he replied quickly. "They'll have you walking again in no time. Physical therapy starts Monday." She swung her legs slowly toward the edge of the bed. "Then I want to leave. Today." Dylan's smile didn't falter, but his eyes cooled. "You can't just check out, Mom. This isn't a hotel." A knock interrupted them. A woman in maroon scrubs stepped in holding a clipboard. "Ms. Rhodes, I just need to confirm a few intake forms for your file." "I'm not staying," Margaret cut in. "I'd like to be discharged." The nurse hesitated. "You'll need a release from your authorized contact." Margaret frowned. "I am the contact. This is my name. My body." The nurse glanced awkwardly at Dylan, then back at her chart. "We have your son listed as primary decision-maker on your care plan." Margaret froze. Her pulse thundered. "Excuse me?" she whispered. "It was signed 2 days ago. Medical power of attorney. It's on file." She turned back to Dylan, fire beginning to build beneath the pain. "You forged it." "Mom," he said, raising his hands as if to soothe a toddler. "You're exhausted. You had a fall. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm protecting you. You're going to be okay here. You're not alone." But she was. When she asked for her purse, he said he'd taken it for safekeeping. Her clothes? Being dry cleaned. Her phone? He paused. "It wasn't in your things." She didn't believe him, and now she couldn't even pretend to. That night, the hallway outside her room echoed with the soft rumble of wheelchairs and the muted cries of someone 2 doors down calling for their daughter. Margaret lay staring at the ceiling, hands folded over the hospital blanket. Her body ached, but her thoughts were razor sharp. He'd planned this. From the moment she hit the floor. "Ms. Rhodes?" A soft voice came from the doorway. Margaret turned. It was a nurse she hadn't seen before. Younger. Quiet eyes. Name tag. Robin. "I'm not supposed to be in here," Robin whispered, stepping inside and drawing the curtain closed behind her. "But I heard you asking about your phone, and I don't think this is right." Margaret sat up a little. "You're the first one who said that." Robin handed her something small and plastic wrapped. A prepaid burner phone. No contacts, no messages, just a fresh line. "I can't promise anything," Robin said, "but I can help." Carefully. Margaret stared at the little phone in her palm. It was cheap, disposable, but right now it was power. And Margaret, at long last, had a line back to the outside world. The disposable phone vibrated under Margaret's pillow, just once. She grabbed it immediately, heart racing. The screen lit with a single word, Joel. She stepped carefully out of bed and answered, whispering into the darkness, "I'm here." "Margaret, I got a document in the mail from Dylan," said Joel Becker, her financial advisor of nearly 3 decades. His voice was low and troubled. "It was a copy of your medical power of attorney. Effective immediately, it said. With your signature, I never signed anything. I figured, that's why I didn't act on it. But I need to see you, in person. This isn't paperwork confusion. It's fraud." Margaret closed her eyes. Her gut had already known. "I can't leave," she said. "Not without help. I can come to you." "No," she replied quickly. "Not here. Not while Dylan has me boxed in. We meet off the record, off the grid." They agreed on a location, the rear lot of an old library downtown, unused after 5 p.m. Quiet. Neutral ground. That night, Robin wheeled Margaret out of her room at 8:10 p.m. sharp. She was dressed in hospital scrubs and a gray zip-up hoodie Robin had borrowed from the staff lounge. Her hair was pulled low under a baseball cap. The halls buzzed softly with shift change. Timing was everything. "No one saw you?" Margaret whispered. Robin smiled. "You blend right in when you look invisible." The facility's side exit was wedged open with a folded lunch tray. Robin helped her into the back seat of her own Honda Civic, parked around the block. She didn't ask questions. She just drove. 15 minutes later, they reached the lot. Joel was already there, seated in the passenger seat of his tan Volvo, parked under a flickering street lamp. He stepped out as they approached, suit jacket wrinkled, a manila folder in hand. He opened it before saying a word. Inside were 2 documents, a printout of the medical power of attorney Dylan had sent, and a copy of Margaret's signature from a tax return 10 years prior. Joel pointed. "That's not your hand. It's slanted right, yours always slants left. And the loop in the G? Nowhere close." Margaret stared at the paper. Rage didn't rise like fire. It crept, like smoke curling beneath a locked door. "He's filed mental incapacity paperwork too," Joel said. "Claims you've had several episodes of disorientation since Henry's death." Margaret almost laughed. Disorientation? She'd handled Henry's estate herself, managed their investments, filed quarterly taxes without a single error. She still did the Sunday crossword in ink. "What are my options?" Joel hesitated. "Legal action, fraud charges, elder abuse, but it's messy. He's your son, and unless we have more evidence, he'll drag it out until you're too exhausted to keep up." "I'm already exhausted," she said, "but not done." Robin stood quietly nearby, watching Margaret with a new kind of respect. "I need access to my finances," Margaret said. "If he's filed this, there's no telling what else he's touched." Joel nodded. "I'll start pulling statements, quietly, but if you challenge the POA, he'll know, and he'll fight back. Then I'll be ready." As they turned to leave, Joel reached into his pocket and handed her a small device. "A voice recorder," he said. "Start keeping a record, every conversation, every odd moment. If he tries to trap you, we document every inch." Back at the facility, Robin helped her back into bed. Margaret held the recorder in one hand, the burner phone in the other. Her tools were crude, but her mind was clear. Tomorrow she would begin. And if Dylan thought she was too weak to fight, then he'd underestimated the wrong mother. Again. The phone call went out at precisely 9:07 a.m., just after vitals check but before group therapy, the window when the staff rotation lagged just enough to buy privacy. Margaret sat upright on her cot, shoulders draped in a shawl Robin had quietly brought from home. The disposable phone was tucked beneath the folds. She hit call. Dylan answered on the second ring. "Mom?" Her voice trembled. By design. "Dylan, sweetheart, I just wanted to say thank you." A pause. "For what?" "For taking care of everything," she said softly. "For saving me. I know I've been difficult, but you did what you had to do, and I see that now." He let out a quiet laugh. "Well, I'm glad you're finally seeing it. Took long enough. I guess I just needed time to think." "You always were a little stubborn." She winced internally. "How's the business?" That got him talking. "Oh, we're good. Actually just locked in 2 new investors. West Coast money. Discreet types. They loved the new pitch deck. Streamlined ops, solid vertical integration, aggressive exit potential." "Impressive," Margaret said, keeping her tone airy. "And you're managing it all yourself?" "Mostly. Got some temp consultants, scaling strategy types. The house sale gave us some flexibility." Her spine tensed, but she smiled through it. "Ah, yes, that must have helped." "Anyway," he said, "don't worry about a thing. You just focus on your recovery. You'll be safe there. It's a good place. Private, clean, insulated. Like a vault." They ended the call after 5 more minutes of polite lies. Margaret pressed end, then slid the phone beneath her mattress. She didn't cry. She emailed Joel that evening using a staff kiosk, claiming it was to update her insurance. Robin had logged her in with a dummy admin credential. The message was brief. Dylan mentioned new investors. Please look into his financials. Shell accounts, recent acquisitions, liquidation signs. I need to know what my signature bought him. M. An hour later, Robin knocked lightly before entering. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and pulled a folding chair up beside the bed. "You okay?" she asked. Margaret nodded once. "I lied to him today." "Good," Robin said. "I made him believe I'm broken. Grateful even. He thinks I've given up." Robin sat back. "Let him keep thinking that." Margaret studied her carefully. "You've done more than you had to. Most people here, they look away." Robin's face darkened. "My grandmother got stuck in a place like this, papers signed by a son who wanted her pension. I couldn't stop it then." "You're trying now." "I want in," Robin said. "Whatever you're planning, I can help. I can access the med records, internal documents, even badge logs. I'm discreet and pissed off." Margaret didn't smile, but something in her gaze warmed. "Then we move forward. Together." That night, Robin brought in a nursing log for the week and showed Margaret the timestamps. Dylan had visited twice, both times during doctor consult windows. He'd chosen gaps when Margaret was groggy from medication. Calculated, measured, but sloppy. He left fingerprints without realizing it. At 3 a.m., Margaret woke and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought of Henry, of the boy Dylan had once been, the one who made her birthday cards from printer paper and lined up his toy trucks in perfect rows. And then she thought of the man now laundering lies through fake companies. She picked up the voice recorder and clicked it on. "This is Margaret Rhodes," she whispered. "I believe my son is using forged legal documents to steal my autonomy, and I plan to take it back." She ended the recording, tucked the device into her pillowcase, and laid back down. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was documenting. Margaret sat alone in the convalescent dining room, pushing a spoon through a half-eaten bowl of gelatinous peaches. The hum of the television in the corner blended with the low scrape of wheelchairs and soft murmurs from other patients, none of them speaking to her. The walls were the color of wilted celery, and the air carried that same sterile heaviness she could never quite adjust to, like everything was wiped down but nothing ever truly clean. Across from her, a tray clattered softly onto the plastic table. Robin sat down, eyes scanning the room before sliding a thick envelope toward Margaret under the napkin dispenser. Her expression was tighter than usual, less conspiratorial, more grim. "This came from Joel this morning," Robin whispered. "He told me to get it to you right away. It's about the house." Margaret peeled open the flap, her fingers steady despite the weight settling in her chest. Inside were printed pages, official county records, notarized transaction forms, and a single yellow highlighted line on a property transfer sheet. Seller, Margaret A. Rhodes. Buyer, New Cassell Holdings, LLC. Purchase price, $312,400. Transfer date, 17 days post-incident. She didn't speak. She just stared at the print until the text began to blur at the edges. Another document followed, a scanned copy of the grant deed itself, complete with her supposed signature. Except the loops were wrong. Her name leaned upright instead of tilting left. The curl of the G was closed, not open the way she'd written it her entire life. He hadn't even gotten the slant right. Her hands lowered the page, resting it flat on the table as if handling a relic from some parallel life. "Joel says the LLC is a front," Robin said gently. "No employees, no activity until last quarter. It's registered to a P.O. box in San Diego, but the trail leads to a business account Dylan controls." Margaret gave a slow nod, though her face remained unreadable. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that it didn't shock her. Some part of her had already known, deep in her marrow, where truth settles long before proof arrives. "So he sold it," she murmured, almost to herself. "The house, the porch swing, Henry's garage workshop, our kitchen table." She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for a napkin from the wire dispenser, flattened it on the table, and pulled a pen from her robe pocket, a small black ballpoint Robin had smuggled in during the previous week's laundry run. Robin watched in silence as Margaret began writing. Not frantically, not with rage, but slowly, methodically, as if outlining the blueprints to something not yet built. What is that? Robin finally asked, her voice cautious. A list, Margaret replied. Of what I have left, of what he's taken, and of what I plan to take back. Robin leaned in closer, eyes scanning the napkin's surface. What's the plan? Margaret paused her pen mid-sentence. She looked up, locking eyes with the younger woman across the table. If he thinks he can sell me off like property, she said, voice cool and deliberate, then he's clearly forgotten who laid the foundation. Robin blinked. You mean that literally? I built that house, Margaret said, helped pour the driveway, sanded those floors after Henry's heart surgery. Dylan grew up in it, but he never owned it. Not in spirit, not in history, and certainly not in truth. She finished writing, tore the napkin neatly in half and handed one side to Robin. Send this to Joel. Use the fax machine next to the med fridge. Dial out first, then hit star 67, just in case. Robin took the paper, folded it tightly, and slipped it into her scrub's pocket. She didn't ask any more questions. That evening, Margaret lay in her narrow bed, voice recorder tucked under her pillow. She clicked it on. This is Margaret Rhodes, she said into the dark. Today I learned my house was sold with my forged signature. I know who did it, and I will make sure every dollar is accounted for. She ended the recording with a soft click, and this time, when she turned off the light, it wasn't with fear. It was with intent. The folder arrived inside a manila envelope folded twice and tucked beneath a tray of sliced turkey sandwiches. Robin slipped it into Margaret's lap during a hallway stroll, a ruse they'd practiced the day before. Smile for the camera, Robin said lightly, gesturing toward the overhead dome near the medication cart. Margaret's grip on the envelope tightened as she offered a slight wave to no one in particular. Inside the envelope, copies of Dylan's supposed power of attorney documents, 4 pages, crisp and freshly notarized, and a sticky note attached in Tessa's handwriting. We're in. Tessa Bell had once interned at Joel's firm. Now she was a certified forensic investigator with a law degree, a ruthlessly calm demeanor, and a quiet vendetta against financial predators. Joel called her the Velvet Hammer. She met Margaret in a staff lounge 3 days later, posing as a physical therapy consultant reviewing fall risk metrics. Robin had arranged the room swap under pretense of non-compliance monitoring. Margaret sat straight in the padded chair as Tessa opened her laptop, revealing 2 windows side by side. This, she said, tapping the left side of the screen, is your real signature from 2016, an amended Roth IRA beneficiary form. Witnessed, digitally time-stamped. Then she pointed to the right window. And this is the signature on the POA Dylan submitted last month. Same name, different hand. Margaret leaned in. How different? 97% mismatch, Tessa said. Loop angles, stroke pressure, ligature lag. The signature wasn't even traced, it was mimicked. Poorly. Margaret nodded, her jaw set. Enough to prove fraud? In any court that isn't asleep, yes, Tessa said. But there's more. We traced Dylan's LLC network. He's moved money through 5 shell corporations over the last 10 months. The one that purchased your home? It exists only on paper and routing code. And the money? Margaret asked. Gone, Tessa replied. Used to shore up investor confidence in a company that's bleeding cash faster than it can invoice. Margaret's fingers curled around the armrests. So the house wasn't just stolen, it was pawned. Exactly. He needed to show liquidity. Your property was a last resort. Tessa didn't say desperation, but it was in the air between them. Any signs he's aware we're onto him? Margaret asked. None yet. He still thinks you're isolated, confused, and emotionally neutralized. Margaret exhaled slowly, her mouth twitching into a grim smile. Good. Let's not wake him. Over the next week, Margaret began playing her role with subtle precision. She asked the same question twice during a call with Dylan. She deliberately forgot the name of one of his board members. When he dropped by for a 10-minute visit, looking polished and disinterested, she offered him a butterscotch from a candy tin and asked if he still worked at that job with the warehouses. He chuckled, smug. Still the same company, Mom. Of course, she said, nodding vaguely. Silly me. Robin kept the logs, Tessa kept the trail. And every evening, Margaret clicked on the voice recorder under her pillow. "This is Margaret Rhodes," she'd begin. "Today he smiled when I forgot on purpose. His tells are tightening. He's proud of what he thinks is manipulation." Robin reported in with new findings. "We got access to the visitor logs. His POA was backdated. The notary? A part-time accountant in Reno. Never met him. She notarized via Zoom with a blurry ID." Margaret wrote that down. She also began collecting statements, copies of Dylan's firm's quarterly earnings, which Tessa acquired through third-party data vendors. They were pitiful. Investor capital burned through faster than staff turnover. Projects in development were vaporware at best. "This man isn't building a business," Tessa said during their next meeting. "He's surviving a lie one signature at a time." Margaret didn't flinch. She simply looked out the window, where trees shook in the late autumn wind, brittle but unbroken. "We're close," Tessa added, "but if we go loud now, it becomes about rage. We wait, document, and bury him in truth." Margaret turned back from the window and met her eyes. "We don't need revenge," she said calmly. "We need receipts." And deep inside, where resolve lived quiet and sharp, Margaret understood. The reckoning wouldn't be loud, but it would be exact. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Margaret sat in the rec room pretending to watch an old rerun of Wheel of Fortune. Her eyes weren't on the screen. They were on the burner phone tucked beneath a crossword puzzle. When it vibrated once, silent, sharp, she knew it was time. She made her way slowly back to her room, where Robin waited with the curtains already drawn. "Check your email," Robin said quietly. Tessa sent something. Margaret logged in, using the fake admin access they'd been maintaining. The message was short. Phase 1 complete. Account hold initiated. Lines frozen. He'll feel it by Friday. Attached was a PDF, confirmation from the compliance team at Fort Ridge Bank. Dylan's business lines, 3 of them, had been temporarily frozen for suspicious structuring behavior. The freeze wasn't permanent yet, but it would choke his liquidity. Margaret stared at the screen. "He's going to notice." "That's the point," Robin said. "Ghosts leave cold spots." Later that day, she signed a document Tessa had couriered in through a hospice liaison. Her estate trust, long protected under a dormant EIN, was reassigned in full to a women-led nonprofit that specialized in elder legal education. Margaret signed each line slowly, her name elegant and deliberate, like laying bricks beneath a house she would never let collapse again. By dusk, Tessa had confirmed it was irreversible. Dylan could contest it, if he ever found out, but the assets were already legally out of reach. The next day brought trouble. Robin burst into Margaret's room pale and breathless. "I got flagged. One of the supervisors caught me pulling the visitor logs. She asked why I was reviewing off-shift files. I played dumb, but she didn't buy it." Margaret's pulse quickened. "Do you think she called Dylan?" "I don't know," Robin said, "but I wouldn't bet against it. He's got eyes everywhere, or at least people who want to stay in his good graces." Margaret sat down carefully, her hips still aching on damp days. "Then we don't wait. We force his hand." Robin blinked. "How?" Margaret opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small checkbook, one she'd demanded under the guise of restarting rent payments once she was discharged. She tore out a check, filled it in slowly, and held it up. $50,000, payable to Dylan Rhodes. Memo: "For everything you've done." Robin leaned in. "He'll deposit it." "That's the idea." They met in the visitor lounge 3 days later. Dylan was late, which Margaret expected. He arrived dressed like a man who'd watched his future start to slip. Too put together, too bright-eyed, too eager. She knew that kind of confidence. It had hinges. "Mom," he said, pulling her in for a hug. She didn't reciprocate. "You look better. Really, I mean it." "I've had time to reflect," she said, her tone gentle. "Oh?" His smile curled. "About what?" "About how hard you've worked. The company, the stress." She laid the envelope on the table. "This is for you." He blinked. "What is it?" "A thank you," she replied, "for everything you've taken on." He opened the flap and froze when he saw the amount. This is generous." I know it's not much, considering all you've had to cover, but it's yours. He pocketed it without hesitation, too distracted by the windfall to notice the slight curl in her lip. What he didn't know was that the account tied to the check was being monitored, flagged, tracked, and connected directly to a digital breadcrumb trail that could tie back to his POA abuse if he cashed it. A tether, a trigger. The moment he tried to profit from her gratitude, the net would start tightening. Back in her room that night, Margaret recorded again. "This is Margaret Rhodes. Today, I baited the hook. The check was issued, the trap is set, and Dylan, he took it with both hands." She turned off the recorder and stared out at the stars peeking through the clouds. No longer a victim. Now, she was a strategist, and the silence ahead felt like the moment before a verdict. It happened at 7:42 a.m., just as Dylan Rhodes pulled into the valet lane of his downtown office tower. He was mid-sip on a double-shot espresso when two unmarked cruisers boxed in his black BMW from both sides. The coffee spilled across his lap, steam curling up like smoke from a fire he hadn't yet realized was his own. The first officer approached with a clipboard. The second rested a hand casually on his holster. "Dylan Everett Rhodes?" Dylan blinked. "Yeah? Is there a problem?" "You're under arrest for financial elder abuse, unlawful use of power of attorney, and wire fraud across state lines." Before he could protest, the cuffs clicked shut behind his back. Hey, this is a mistake. I'm the power of attorney. She's not competent." The officer read him his rights over the roar of a passing bus. A security guard from the lobby filmed the entire exchange on his phone. By 8 a.m., the footage was trending on Twitter under the hashtag #StartupScammer. Back at the facility, Margaret sat beside her window in a cream cardigan and cotton slippers, a tea tray balanced on her lap. Robin slipped in quietly, holding her phone out. "You're going to want to see this." Margaret leaned forward. Dylan's mugshot stared back from the news site, his tie crooked, his eyes wide. The article's headline read, "Tech CEO arrested in elder fraud sting, investors stunned." Underneath, mentions of frozen assets, bank flagging, and an ongoing investigation into multiple shell corporations. Margaret lowered the phone and folded her hands in her lap. Her expression didn't change. She simply exhaled. By noon, half of Dylan's investor network had pulled out. By 3 p.m., Tessa had secured a formal request to the district court for reversal of the fraudulent house transfer. The grant deed was now under litigation. The LLC trail, thankfully, was already paved with enough evidence to suggest premeditation. That evening, Joel arrived with a manila envelope and a grin that was sharper than usual. "You're officially clear," he said. "Facility discharge paperwork has been filed. Mental competency certified by 2 independent evaluators. The board here has no further hold on you." Margaret glanced at the document inside, her own name, stamped and signed. She was free. Robin wiped her eyes quietly behind her. "I want it in writing," Margaret said, still calm. "No chance for them to claim recurrence, no follow-up evaluations." Joel nodded. "Done. And Tessa's already 2 steps ahead. We've also got court dates for the revocation of POA and a criminal complaint. Dylan's bail hearing is Monday." Margaret stood slowly, her cane steady beneath her hand. She wasn't fast yet, but she didn't shake. At a press event the following day, impromptu but attended by a dozen reporters drawn in by the viral arrest, Margaret stood at the lectern set up outside the courthouse. A few held up signs, others just stood silently, curious. She adjusted the microphone. No notes, no script. "I didn't come here to ruin my son," she said, voice clear despite the wind. "I came here to remind people that getting older doesn't mean becoming invisible. This wasn't about revenge, it was about respect." A reporter called out, "What will you do if he denies it?" Margaret looked directly into the camera. "He already has. That's what narcissists do. But he signed his name with my pen. He spent my equity like loose change. He sold my home with a forgery. And I documented every inch of it." She stepped back, letting the flashes pop like firecrackers. Later, Tessa met her outside the courtroom steps. "We're filing to void the home transfer by next week," she said. "Given the criminal charge, we're likely to get it fast-tracked." "And Dylan?" "Currently in holding," Tessa replied. His bail hearing's scheduled, but the IRS just issued a lien. He may not see daylight for a while." Margaret nodded once. "Good." That night, in her new temporary suite, no cameras, no badge access, no intercoms, Margaret clicked on her recorder one last time before sleep. "This is Margaret Rhodes. He called it caregiving. I called it theft. And now the state calls it criminal. My home is coming back. And so is my name." She turned off the light and laid back. Not with relief, but with resolution. The first call came at 6:03 a.m. Margaret had just settled into her armchair with a cup of English breakfast and a small ceramic dish of buttered toast. The windows of her temporary apartment were cracked just enough to let in the early summer breeze. The room smelled like lemonwood polish and warm grain. Peace lived here now. The burner phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Robin, still in pajama pants and one of Margaret's oversized cardigans, glanced at the screen. "It's him," she said. "County jail." Automated line. Margaret didn't look up. "Let it ring out." Robin waited 5 more seconds before silencing the phone. "That's the 4th one this week." "He'll keep calling," Margaret murmured. Narcissists aren't capable of silence, especially when they're losing. She took another sip of tea, steady as ever. 3 days later, Margaret stood before a sea of folding chairs inside the community auditorium of Grace Lutheran on Maplewood Avenue. The carpet was stained, the lights too dim, but every seat was filled. Grandmothers, war veterans, widowers with clip-on ties, and sons who still remembered what betrayal sounded like when disguised as concern. A navy vinyl banner stretched across the stage: empowerment and protection, senior rights in the 21st century. Joel had asked her to speak. Robin had arranged the ride. Tessa had cleared it with the press team. No media, just testimony. That's all Margaret ever wanted. Robin stood nearby, holding a printed pamphlet and a quiet smile. Margaret approached the podium. Her cane tapped once, twice on the wooden floor before she set it aside. "I was 72 when my son decided I no longer had value," she began. "He used soft words and legal ink to steal my name, my house, and my freedom. And for a time, I let him, because I thought silence would protect what dignity I had left." The crowd was still, every breath held between syllables. "But silence," she said, "protects the wrong people." Murmurs. A few nods. Someone in the back whispered, "That's right. I didn't fight back with anger. I fought back with documentation. I wrote things down. I recorded the lies. I used the same tools they used to control me, and I gave the system what it claimed to need: proof." Her voice didn't tremble. It was not a speech. It was testimony. And Margaret made sure it would ring louder than any apology Dylan could offer from behind plexiglass. "My name is Margaret Rhodes," she finished. "And old doesn't mean obsolete." Applause didn't erupt. It rose, steady and sustained, the kind of sound that doesn't cheer a performance but salutes a survivor. Afterward, she sat with families who shared their stories, checks signed without permission, retirement funds rerouted, adult children using the word burden like it was practical vocabulary. Margaret listened, took notes, offered names of non-profit advisors. That evening, Joel texted her a single line: "Just confirmed. The IRS is now auditing Dylan directly. Income misstatements plus payroll misreporting. It's moving faster than expected." She stared at the screen, the words oddly anticlimactic. But there was no real thrill in watching someone else fall, only relief in knowing they couldn't reach her anymore. Robin returned with sandwiches and 2 iced teas. "You good?" Margaret nodded. "He called again this morning." Robin raised an eyebrow. "And?" I didn't answer. They ate in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas outside pulse against the thickening dusk. Somewhere, a sprinkler kicked on. Then Robin asked, "What would you say if you did pick up?" Margaret wiped her hands on a cloth napkin and leaned back. "I'd say the thing he never gave me. Goodbye." And maybe she would. Eventually. But not today. Because today wasn't about closure, it was about continuation. It began with a letterhead. Margaret unfolded the tri-fold envelope slowly, seated at the same kitchen table where she'd once wept over a blank discharge form. But now the form she held bore her name, not as a patient, as a shareholder. Robin, standing nearby in her pale blue scrubs and worn-out clogs, grinned like someone holding in a secret for too long. "I told you the board was open to private capital," she said. "Didn't say it'd be you." Margaret traced her name on the ownership agreement. "How much?" 22%, Robin replied. "Enough to steer policy. Enough to clean house." The paperwork was clean. Joel had made sure of that. Tessa had helped launder it through a local real estate holding firm, one not linked to Dylan in any way, and Margaret had done the rest, called in favors, dusted off old CDs and forgotten annuities, and emptied a chunk of the settlement Joel had helped secure. She wasn't just investing in brick and drywall, she was reclaiming ground. 3 weeks later, she walked through the front doors of the convalescent home. Not in a wheelchair, not in a hospital gown, but in tailored slacks, a pressed blouse, and with her hair pulled back into a soft twist. The front desk staff glanced up, confused, unsure whether to offer a seat or stand at attention. "Is Robin on site?" Margaret asked. "She's upstairs, ma'am, reviewing shift reports." "Let her know the new stakeholders early." Robin met her at the elevator, cheeks flushed, tablet under one arm. "You're really doing this," she said, breathless. "I already did." They started with a full audit. Margaret reviewed every name on the payroll. She remembered which aides whispered to her kindly and which ones left her tray cold. The worst offenders, those who ignored cries for water or belittled the lucid, were quietly removed within the month. Robin was promoted to executive director on a unanimous vote. Margaret didn't just support it, she insisted on it. "I don't need titles," Margaret told her, "but you do, because the right ones make people listen." Next came the name. The old signage, Sterling Glen Transitional, was ripped down on a Thursday. The replacement arrived in matte bronze, hand-cast and heavy enough to require a winch. Grace House. No longer a way station for the discarded, now a place built on restoration, of mobility, of voice, of dignity. Margaret stood outside during the soft relaunch, her cane planted firmly in the gravel as a new generation of nurses arrived in slate-gray uniforms with crisp white stitching. Behind her, contractors installed a glass-enclosed room in the West Wing, the future site of Grace House's legal literacy lab, where seniors would learn how to recognize fraud, defend their rights, and appoint advocates who weren't their nearest kin but their truest allies. At lunch, Robin handed her a small envelope, yellowed and creased. "Came from the county jail," she said. Inside, a one-page letter from Dylan, full of vague apologies, twisted logic, and one final plea. He offered a deal. If she retracted her public statements and softened her testimony, he'd agree to restitution, reduced penalties in exchange for her silence. Margaret said nothing. That evening, she sat alone in her apartment. She reread the letter once, then tore it slowly, carefully, into 4 neat strips. She placed them into a smaller envelope, sealed it, and mailed it back. No return note. No second chance. 2 days later, word came in. Dylan's plea bargain had been denied. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony airtight. The judge had reviewed hours of audio, notarized inconsistencies, and a paper trail so robust even his defense team stopped objecting. He would stand full trial. Margaret stepped into Grace House's new conference room just before sunset, where Robin had prepared a slideshow for incoming volunteers. "Should I push the presentation back?" Robin asked. "No," Margaret replied, resting her hand on the glass table. "Let's begin." From the ashes of deception, she had built something not just restorative, but preventative, not revenge. Rebirth. And as the slideshow began, a faint vibration buzzed in her pocket. A voicemail. County jail. She didn't listen. She pressed delete and opened the first slide titled, "How to Guard a Name They Tried to Erase." The courthouse smelled like paper dust and carpet glue, old bureaucracy repackaged in newer folders. Margaret sat beside Tessa in a walnut-paneled mediation room, her hands folded over a manila binder marked Rhodes v. Rhodes. A judicial assistant passed out copies of financial disclosures, unaware that each page was a small piece of reclamation. Tessa flipped the first tab. "We go line by line," she said. siphoned equity, improper withdrawals, falsified POA-backed wire transfers. Margaret didn't nod. She simply blinked once. I want it all traced, not because I need it, but because it was mine. Across the hall, Dylan waited with his third attorney in as many weeks. His eyes didn't meet hers when the doors opened. He didn't ask to. The plea bargain had crumbled. Now all that remained was litigation. Civil, public, unrelenting. By the end of the week, Margaret's case had teeth: fiduciary fraud, financial coercion, emotional distress compounded by medical exploitation. Joel, ever methodical, filed backdated restitution requests for every account Dylan had touched since the day she fell. Tessa subpoenaed his business leases, tracking them through shell firms now stripped of their protection by prosecutorial action. The judgment came in under seal first, then public a week later. All misappropriated assets to be liquidated. All residual holdings, personal or corporate, frozen and reassigned until full debt reconciliation. The plaintiff is awarded restitution, damages, and future interest under Title 38C, Section 912. Dylan's downtown apartment seized. His black BMW repossessed. The co-working suite where he once held pitch meetings locked, lease terminated, contents inventoried and tagged by marshals. And with every line item recovered, Margaret felt no surge of triumph, just stillness. Like water settling after a long, violent ripple. Robin found her that Sunday in the Grace House greenhouse, trimming rosemary beside a row of sun lamps. "You did it," Robin said, brushing potting soil from her sleeves. "No," Margaret replied. "I undid what he tried to bury." Later that month, she sat with Joel in his small office, surrounded by half-drunk mugs of cold coffee and stacked financial reports. "Funny thing," Joel said, holding up a pale green folder. "You had an old annuity account I forgot we set up in '93. You never touched it. It matured last quarter." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "How much?" "Enough to keep Grace House solvent through 2 renovations." He handed over the transfer slip. Margaret didn't blink at the numbers. She just smiled, slow and satisfied. "Send it," she said. "Build the West Wing library. I want large print legal books and magnifying screens on every table." She didn't stop there. From the restitution, Margaret instructed a portion be anonymously donated. Quiet grants wired to verified single mothers enrolled in night classes. No return address, no publicity. Just names on ledgers marked Education Continuity Fund. When asked why, she simply said, "Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated on paper." On the final page of the last report, Tessa left a handwritten note. "He tried to drown you in documents, but you rose above the ink." Margaret tucked the page into her journal. That night, she lit a single candle in the window of her apartment overlooking Grace House. The wind hummed against the pane. She stared out at the building once used to silence her, now lit with late-night legal seminars and group therapy for survivors of exploitation. Her name wasn't etched on the cornerstone, but it didn't need to be. She opened her voice recorder one last time. "This is Margaret Rhodes," she said softly. "He wanted to bury me with paperwork. I rose with purpose, and every page he forged now folds into my foundation." She paused. No bitterness in her tone, only weight, only weathered truth. Outside, a group of volunteers finished hauling in folding chairs for next week's elder finance workshop. She watched them, then clicked the recorder off. The screen went dark, but Margaret stayed upright in her chair, awake long after the last light across the street flicked off, because she knew the next fight wouldn't come with warning, and she'd be ready when it did. Margaret adjusted the collar of her pale blue blouse and sat forward under the soft arc of studio lights. The microphone between them looked deceptively gentle, padded and curved like something meant to record lullabies. But Margaret knew better. This wasn't lullaby work. This was excavation. Across from her, the host of American Undercurrents leaned in with the practiced warmth of someone who'd listened to 1,000 stories, but still knew when one mattered more. "Are you ready?" he asked. Margaret nodded once. "Let's begin." They started soft, background, family, the fall in the kitchen. But 20 minutes in, They were inside the real terrain, the forged power of attorney, the illegal home transfer, the rehab facility, and the slow war fought not with lawyers, but with patience and proof. "You never pressed charges for revenge," the host noted. "Why not?" "Because I didn't want him gone," Margaret answered calmly. "I wanted myself back." The recording wrapped just past noon. The producer offered her chamomile tea and compliments. Margaret took neither. By nightfall, the episode was live. Within 48 hours, it had over 2 million downloads. They called it the Grace House Battle. Hashtags followed. Think pieces emerged. Editorials dissected Dylan's downfall with brutal fascination. A Business Week column titled "When the Founder's Mother Fights Back" framed it as a cultural referendum on startup toxicity and inheritance ethics. Dylan's LinkedIn vanished quietly. His name was scrubbed from his company's website. Angel investors who once fawned over his vertical integration genius now issued tight-lipped statements about internal audits and unanticipated risk exposure. He became radioactive. Margaret stayed silent for a week. Let the story settle. Let the country breathe it in. Then she spoke again. This time at the National Summit for Economic Justice. The auditorium pulsed with journalists, students, and activists, all of them expecting fire. But what Margaret gave them was flint. She took the stage slowly, wearing the same slacks from her Grace House board meetings, no teleprompter, no cue cards. "My name is Margaret Rhodes," she began, "and I was once a mother, a wife, a widow. And then, one morning, I became a victim of someone else's paperwork." Silence. She let it hold. "I survived it not because I had money or connections or youth. I survived because I paid attention, because I documented everything, and because no one else was going to do it for me." A ripple passed through the room. She continued, "Old doesn't mean easy, doesn't mean passive, and it sure as hell doesn't mean disposable." The clip hit social media before she even left the stage. By dusk, her words were plastered across graphics with headlines like "The Matriarch Who Sued Back" and "Gray Hair, Sharp Mind, How Margaret Rhodes Changed the POA Game." Robin found her later on a park bench near the summit venue, scrolling through her phone with a mix of awe and amusement. "You're trending." Margaret looked out at a nearby fountain where a child tossed pennies without aiming. "I didn't want to trend," she said. "I wanted to be heard." Robin sat beside her. "Well, now you're both." Letters began arriving the following week, some typed, some handwritten, all raw. A veteran from Michigan whose daughter drained his savings through power of attorney. A retired librarian whose son mortgaged her home without consent. A single mother who feared she'd be seen as a burden when her body slowed. Margaret read everyone. She wrote back to most. Then one morning, as she poured cream into her coffee, her phone buzzed again, this time from Tessa. The text read, "He's retained a new legal team, civil defense, reputational rehab, motion to unseal the documents. Get ready, he's going to fight back. Narcissists don't go down clean." Margaret stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't reply. Instead, she walked to her kitchen drawer, pulled out her voice recorder, and clicked it on. "This is Margaret Rhodes," she said, voice low but firm, "and I knew this wasn't over. But I also know what I've built can't be undone. He can try to rewrite history. But I've archived the truth. Dated. Signed. Time-stamped." She paused. The breeze fluttered the curtain. Then she added, "Let him come," and clicked the recorder off, because the war hadn't returned. It had just evolved. The courtroom's temperature hovered somewhere between stale and suffocating. A ceiling fan rotated in slow, lazy circles, doing little to cool the charged air beneath it. Margaret sat in the front row of the gallery, hands folded calmly over a notebook she hadn't opened all morning. She didn't need notes. Not for this. Across the aisle, Dylan Rhodes sat at the defense table in a navy blazer a size too large. His new legal team, 2 sharp-faced men and 1 tired paralegal, shuffled through folders with performative energy. Their strategy was clear: create doubt, blur the lines, humanize the fraudster. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the defense rose to introduce its argument. "Your Honor," said the lead attorney. "We contend that the events leading to Mr. Rhodes's arrest were the result of coercion and entrapment, initiated not by malice on his part, but manipulation by emotionally complex parties with influence over an aging parent." Margaret didn't flinch. He was led to believe his mother was mentally unstable, that she required aggressive care, swift financial oversight, and long-term restructuring of her estate. Everything he did out of concern. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with a silver bun and horn-rimmed glasses, didn't move. Her pen made a single notation on the pad in front of her. That was all. Then came the cross-examination. Robin took the stand just after 10. Her scrubs were freshly pressed, and her badge, now inscribed Director of Care, Grace House, caught the courtroom lights like a quiet medal. She answered clearly, directly. Yes, she had helped Margaret recover documents. Yes, she had witnessed Dylan's suspicious visits. Yes, she had seen forged signatures, altered medications, and falsified consent forms. But did you influence Mrs. Rhodes emotionally? The defense pushed. Did you plant doubt? Robin paused just long enough. No, she said. I listened. There's a difference. Then she handed over a folder. Shift logs, medication charts, badge scans, all time-stamped, all unimpeachable. She stepped down without looking at Dylan once. The next blow came from the forensic accountant Tessa had retained. In a dry surgical tone, he outlined a trail that extended far beyond Margaret's stolen house. Multiple life insurance policies, he testified, filed and canceled repeatedly, beneficiary manipulation, identity data used to open lines of credit in 3 different states. Mrs. Rhodes, the prosecutor asked. Number her deceased husband gasps stirred in the gallery. Margaret remained still. When it was Dylan's turn to take the stand, he walked slowly. Too slowly, Margaret thought. Like he was trying on remorse for the first time and hadn't quite tailored it to fit. He spoke haltingly, hands wringing themselves into knots. He blamed confusion, family pressure, unprocessed grief. Then he wept. It wasn't the loud kind, just soft, controlled tears that dripped as if on cue. His shoulders shook, his voice cracked. But the judge didn't reach for tissues. She didn't soften. She simply leaned forward. Mr. Rhodes, at any point, did you voluntarily disclose the fraudulent POA or the unauthorized home sale? I didn't know it was... That's a yes or no. He looked up, lips parted, caught mid-performance. No, he whispered. The courtroom fell still. At 4:12 p.m., the judge delivered her ruling. All pending claims from the defendant are hereby dismissed. Mr. Rhodes is barred from acting as a fiduciary, executor, or financial proxy in any legal or personal capacity for the rest of his life. There was no cheer, no celebration, just the thud of a gavel and the quiet hush of reality finally closing in. Margaret stood to leave. She didn't glance at Dylan, not out of contempt, but because there was simply nothing left to see. Outside, as the evening sun cut across the courthouse steps, Robin joined her at the sidewalk. He cried, Robin said quietly. I saw, Margaret replied. He cried for himself, not for what he did. They stood there a moment longer before walking toward the waiting car. The wind picked up slightly, lifting the edges of Margaret's scarf. Back inside her apartment later that night, Margaret stared out the window again. Same chair, same view. But the world had shifted. The war was over. But history, she knew, was still listening. So she picked up the recorder. This is Margaret Rhodes, she said. They let him cry. But I never let him rewrite. Click. The visitor's room smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine-scented floor polish, the kind meant to sterilize emotion as much as germs. Margaret sat across from the glass partition, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a soft navy cardigan draped over her shoulders. The room was quiet, except for the subtle hum of the fluorescent lights and the slow inhale-exhale of the guard standing off to the left. Dylan entered from the opposite door. He looked smaller now. Not physically, but stripped. The swagger had bled out somewhere between the arraignment and the judgment. His orange jumpsuit didn't help. Neither did the way he held the phone to his ear, hesitant, like he still expected her to reach across and make things easy again. She didn't. He spoke first. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Margaret's face remained still. I was drowning. The company was failing. The funding dried up. After Dad died, there was no safety net, and I was supposed to be—" He stopped himself, voice catching. "I didn't know what else to do." "You forged my name," she said calmly. He looked down. "You lied to the court. You stole the house I built." Silence. "And you sold a memory for liquidity." I panicked. He whispered. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I was under. The startup world doesn't wait for grief." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her gaze like weathered steel. "No, Dylan. You don't get to blame gravity for pushing someone you tripped." His jaw flexed. She could see him trying to summon a rebuttal, some last manipulation disguised as regret. She didn't give him the room. "You wanted this conversation," she said. "So here it is. You looked me in the eye and signed away what wasn't yours. You watched me shrink so you could feel taller, and when the crack showed, you tried to call it love. I thought I was helping," he said weakly. "No," she said, standing slowly. "You thought I'd stay quiet?" She rested her hand on the divider's frame. The glass was cool beneath her palm. "I'm not here to fix you, Dylan. I'm here to say goodbye." His eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean goodbye?" But she had already turned. She didn't walk fast. She didn't need to. But she walked away, and with each step the air felt less like burden and more like breath. That night, in her apartment lit by warm lamplight and the amber spill of sunset, Margaret sat at her kitchen table. The same table where, months ago, she had stared at a forged document and felt the sharp, silent weight of betrayal settle behind her ribs. But now, there was something else there. Peace. She opened a leather folio and removed the deed. Her name, unambiguous, etched across the top in black ink. Margaret A. Rhodes, sole owner. Grace House, LLC. No asterisks, no contingencies. Just the truth, finally on paper. A knock came just before 7. Robin stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of tulips and a folder tucked under one arm. She wore jeans and a zip-up fleece, hair still damp from the late shift. Behind her, the wind picked up gently, tossing leaves against the walkway. "New residents moved in today," Robin said, handing her the flowers. "One's a retired teacher from Baton Rouge. Others a Vietnam vet who can still outwalk half the staff." Margaret took the bouquet, placing it in a vase without comment. "We're up to capacity, and the literacy lab just got its first law school volunteer." Margaret turned, smiling. "Not bad," she said, tapping her cane on the hardwood. "For dead weight." Robin laughed, but it broke a little at the end. They sat by the window together, sipping chamomile and watching the sun slip below the rooftops. "Do you miss him?" Robin asked softly. Margaret didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I miss who I thought he was, but I don't mourn the man he became." Outside, the lights at Grace House flickered on, soft gold against the deepening blue, and as Margaret leaned back in her chair, cane resting against her leg, the room felt steady, safe. She didn't need her recorder tonight. Some truths didn't need repeating. Some stories were already closed. The garden was quiet that morning, warm with the kind of light that softened edges and made old things seem eternal. Margaret sat beneath the arching limbs of a plum tree, a wide-brimmed straw hat resting on her head and a notebook open across her lap. The pages were blank, not because she had nothing left to say, but because, for once, she didn't need to write it down. Some truths had already been planted. In the distance, the Grace House wind chimes rattled gently in the breeze. Bees moved lazily between lavender blooms, and a retired nurse named Althea hummed while watering the marigolds. It felt like the kind of place you return to in dreams, not to escape, but to remember. Robin joined her with 2 cups of iced tea, handing one off and sitting down with a soft exhale. "Big mail haul today," she said. 4 more letters from advocacy groups, and 1 from the Attorney General's office. They're using your testimony in a statewide training module. Margaret nodded, eyes still on the roses. "And the book?" Robin smiled. "Still standing, just hit number 3 in public policy memoirs." You beat 2 senators and a guy who wrote about Amazon's tax strategy. Margaret laughed, short and sharp. Poetic justice. Her memoir had started as a journal, notes to herself while trapped behind hospital curtains and plastic meal trays. Joel edited it, Tessa proofed the footnotes, Robin designed the cover, but the voice inside was entirely hers, unfiltered, direct, and quietly unsparing. She hadn't written it for catharsis. She'd written it so no one else had to start from scratch. The gate creaked. Robin looked up first, shielding her eyes from the sun. You expecting someone? Margaret shook her head, then saw the figure approaching, a young woman, maybe 22, with soft curls, a denim jacket, and cautious eyes. She carried a copy of Still Standing in one hand, dog-eared and swollen from use. Mrs. Rhodes? She asked gently. You probably don't remember me. I'm Talia. My mom's cousin was Henry's niece. You sent us a grant a few months ago. For her nursing school, Margaret tilted her head, studying the girl. I read your book, Talia said, stepping closer. I didn't know people could fight like that. I didn't know we were allowed to. Margaret motioned to the bench beside her. You are. Talia sat. The book rested between them like a folded bridge. Robin quietly excused herself. The two women talked for over an hour about caregiving, ambition, what courage looks like when no one's watching. Talia was funny, smart. She made Margaret laugh out loud twice. When the sun shifted and the breeze picked up, Margaret handed her a pair of gardening gloves, and they clipped dead blossoms together, side by side, hands stained with hope. That evening, Margaret returned to her desk. A new file awaited her, one she'd requested weeks ago. Inside, the final paperwork. She signed over full legal designation of Grace House and the rest of her estate to a nonprofit she and Tessa had co-founded, the Elder Care Integrity Alliance. Its mission was simple: protect the aging, prosecute the predators, and educate the next generation before it became the last line of defense. She signed the document with slow precision, no trembling, no regret. Then she pulled out her voice recorder one last time. Her voice came steady, the tone resolute but warm, like hardwood warmed by decades of morning light. This is Margaret Rhodes. I spent 2 years documenting what was stolen, recording what was hidden, and reclaiming what was called lost. But I've come to understand, legacy isn't what's inherited, it's what's built. She paused. In a world where people use your age against you, every act of resistance becomes instruction. Margaret stood, walking to the kitchen. The lights flicked on overhead, soft and golden. On the counter sat a ceramic tile with the words, "Truth leaves a trail," carved into it. She placed the recorder down beside it. Final words, low and clear. He put me in a facility. I built one with walls he could never touch and truth he'll never outrun. Click. The screen went dark. The legacy did not.